There we go. Let me turn on. Oh, can't turn that on. Okay. Well. God dag och välkommen! Today we are editing some photos of an Audi RS5. I got some interior photos. There were a couple that I thought were good enough to put on my photo print store. So I imported them into Lightroom, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm just going to kind of talk through my process for what I'm doing and what I'm thinking as I go through them. So if you're editing photos of something similar in the future, maybe this is something you can kind of keep in mind or kind of reference uh, when you edit your photos. So I'm going to put that in a little bit. Okay. Oop. Put this on this side so you can see the histogram. All right, how's that look? Cool, cool. Okay, so this is obviously the gear shifter in the center console of the Audi RS5. Overall, I think it already looks pretty good, but I can already see some little things I'm going to touch up, definitely in Photoshop. Um, but um, let's just go ahead and start playing around with the exposure settings in Lightroom, and I'm just going to wiggle the exposure just to kind of see. The bit rate's too low. All right. Bit rate 6,000. Apply. Okay. All right. Let's try that. See if that improves. If it doesn't, I'm going to go ahead and restart the stream, but it let me change that setting on the fly, so hopefully it gets better here pretty quick. All right, so just going to play around with the exposure a little bit. It's already kind of a dark photo, but that's kind of the vibe I want to stick with. But when you bump up the contrast, a lot of times it'll squish everything into the dark, but I don't think we need to mess with the contrast on this one. And you can see on the histogram, all of it's already very dark. It's almost all shadow, with some in the blacks. So, okay, tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and restart the stream. Hopefully it will improve the health. So let me go ahead and stop. All right, we have restarted. It looks like it has a much better connection now. So, all right, back to it. The highlights. Highlights are something we're going to want to probably drag up a bit because the whole photo is super dark. So let's you can kind of see that it's adjusting those silver surfaces that reflect a lot of light and kind of the top of the gear shifter. And you can see the histogram. We're starting to drag a lot of our colors up into the mid-range here. But I don't want to adjust the highlights that high. We can kind of see the noise levels are getting pretty high already. So before I do anything else, I do want to check to see how the luminance will handle that. So it looks like it does pretty well. 41's pretty high. But this is a kind of photo where you are really looking at the surfaces and the texture and stuff, so you don't want to crank the luminance too high either, because that'll end up smoothing out a lot of the natural texture that you want to retain. You can still see the leather pretty well on the gear shifter, so let's take the luminance down to 20 and see what that does. And that looks all right. I feel comfortable with that. So let's go ahead and keep the highlights there for now. We're going to play with the shadows. We can bring the shadows up a bit. That looks pretty good. It's just a little bit right there. I don't want to get rid of the contrast too much. So I don't want to bring up the shadows a ton, because if you do that, it kind of just flattens out the photo. You can kind of see where there's not as much contrast in the light and dark. So I want to leave the shadows a little lower. Check out the whites. That's really affecting the silver on there, so I don't want to drag that up too much. It just looks kind of blown out, and actually kind of gives it a little bit of a, maybe a little bit of a yellow tint. So I think I'm going to leave the whites alone. The blacks, pull blacks up a tiny bit. That looks pretty good. Okay, so when I was saying that you want to retain a lot of the texture, here's where we're at now. So I'm going to zoom in on the leather right here. It's kind of an Alcantara. It's a very shallow depth of field. This is at 58 millimeters. I even bumped it up to f3.5, but it's still very shallow because I'm so close to it. The RF 24 to 70 really has a low minimum focusing distance, so you can almost use it for macro if you get the zoom just right and you're the right distance from the subject. It really does a really good job of getting up close to the subject. So you can see here, like this area right here is in focus and it just fades out almost immediately. But let's bump up the texture and see what that does to the Alcantara here. Okay, so it does really bring out the texture of the Alcantara, but let's check out something that's supposed to be smooth and see what it does to that. Okay, you can kind of see that it introduces almost what looks like noise on something that's really smooth, so you don't want that, but I do want to bump it up a little bit just so it brings out a little more detail in the Alcantara. So let's go with 25. Let's look back down here. And that looks pretty smooth. Yeah, that's keeping the smoothness pretty good. Now let's go fiddle it with the luminance again and see what that does to the Alcantara. Okay, I bumped it up 10 points. Does that make a difference down here? It does make a pretty significant difference on the silver surfaces, and it doesn't make too much of a difference on the Alcantara. So the threads are, these threads are in focus, and those still look pretty good. It doesn't really affect it. The luminance doesn't affect the threads too much, but it does noticeably decrease the noise levels on the leather. So I think that's a good spot for the texture and the luminance. I'm going to keep those there for now. And move on to clarity. I don't like using the clarity slider much because it is so easy to overdo, and so many photographers that are new to editing really overdo the clarity slider a lot. It's easy to abuse, but most people I see make it too high. It can be useful to lower the clarity to kind of smooth out surfaces a little more. Like you can see if I drag it all the way down, it really smooths all this out, and it just destroys the texture in the Alcantara. So let's bring it up and I'll show you what that does. That just makes it almost too contrasty. But yeah, it just looks bad when you do it that much. And I see so many pictures and photographers that they just blast the clarity, and it makes it look fake and over edited. And that's what you don't want to do that. So I think what I'm going to do, since all these surfaces are pretty smooth and fluid, I think dropping the clarity will really help kind of emphasize the smoothness, but we don't want to do it too much either. So let's reset it. Let's do -10. -20. -20 might be the sweet spot for that. Whoop. I'm not sold on it. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to mess with it. I don't think that's making I don't think that's making enough of a payoff, if I could talk. Speak properly. Now, dehaze, it's hard to describe what it does, but you can see here, if I move dehaze all the way down, it just kind of smooths everything over and puts a haze on it. So you're reversing dehazing. So you're basically hazing it. And if you turn it all the way up, it really just kind of sharpens the colors up. Moves a lot of it into the blacks. Down here you can see on the histogram. Getting another photo with a lot more color, I think, would really demonstrate what dehazing does better, and one that isn't so dark. So this isn't a good photo to demonstrate dehazing. But it does tend to make your colors pop a little more because it reduces the exposure or the luminance of the colors, and so it enhances the saturation a little bit. If you're an expert and you know what dehazing does specifically, please correct me down in the comments. I'm just judging on what I'm observing, so I could have it wrong technically. That's just how it looks to me. So I think dehazing a little bit is good, because if you do it too much, it makes it really dark. And we just bumped up the exposure a little bit, so I'm going to go with 25. That looks good. It really doesn't seem to make it suffer until you get above like 60. So let's do 35. I'll leave it right there for now, and I can always change it later. One thing I forgot to do is the color temperature. I did mention a slight yellow tint to it. So we're at 4400 right now. Let's go 4600. Whoa, what did I put? Oh, 460. Let's do 5000. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Ooh, let's do 4200. Oh no, I lost my camera. There we go. Okay. So we're adjusting the color balance. Lowering the number is telling it what to compensate for, not increasing the temperature of the actual photo. So it's kind of backwards. If it's you're using a tungsten bulb, you'll put in the color temperature of the tungsten bulb, which is a low color temperature, which is going to make it look warmer. So the camera compensates for that low value and increases the balance of it. So it'll compensate to a cooler value if you're exposing for a lower value color temperature. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but there's a lot of videos about color temperature out there. If you want to learn more about it, I'd highly encourage you to just go to YouTube, color temperature, color balance, do a couple searches about that, and you will find lots of material. But basically, I'm trying to cool it off a little bit, but I don't want to do it too much. It was at 4,400. Let's do 4,300. I keep putting 430, 4,300. I don't even know if I can tell the difference. Let's look at saturation. Okay, you can really see some of the greens and yellows and the reflections come out. In the dealership, they have more orange bulbs up in the ceiling, which you can kind of see in the reflections here. Like right along here, and this green, I think, is a result of the tinting on the windows. So we don't want to lower the saturation. We just want to get rid of the green and yellow because it doesn't really mix with the dark and reds of the picture. So we can mess with that later on. So highlights here. Do we want to increase the highlights? That gives it a little more shine on that silver. So let's bump up the highlights a little bit. I don't want to bring up the lights. Darks, I think that just affects too much of the photo. Then the blacks. I think I'm going to keep the others where they are. So here's where we can get rid of the kind of green tint and the yellow tint. You can come down to saturation and start dropping that yellow value. Now you don't want to drop it all the way because you can see right here on the side of the gear shifter, if you drop it all the way down, it does make it look kind of flat. You don't want to drop it all the way down, but you do want to drop the yellow down to where you don't really notice it, but it still enhances the picture a little bit. So see, if I turn it all the way up, you can definitely see all that yellow over here. Let's show the green. You can definitely see that green now. So let's bring that down a bit. Not, like I said, not too much to where it just totally destroys it, but just enough to where you don't really notice it anymore. Okay, I think that looks good. Now, if you want to see the blue reflections, that's aqua. You can definitely see where the blue is coming in. That's light from the windows of the actual dealership, the building itself. It's bouncing off of a building next door, and it's kind of a gunmetal bluish gray. And so you can definitely see how that's coming in from this side of the photo. And then you see if you take it all away, it just kind of makes it look flat. You're not sure why, because there's still color there, but there's just something that's missing. So you can definitely see the blue here, but we're going to drop it a bit. Do we even need to drop it? Actually, I think where it's at right now is pretty good. Maybe even increasing it a little bit. So blue and red are complementary colors on the color wheel. And so sometimes adding in a color that complements your accent colors is a really good idea. Looking at this photo, you wouldn't think, oh, I'm going to throw a bunch of blue in there. But as I'm looking at it, a little bit of blue does look pretty good, and it makes that red pop even more. So that's one reason it's good to just kind of play around with your colors, see what looks good, because I was originally going to drop the blues, but then I remembered blue is a complementary color to red, and increasing it actually kind of makes it look pretty good. So I'm going to 40, 30, 35. I think that looks good. That looks good right there. All right. Red. Red. Do you want to pull that all the way up? That looks a little extra. But we could make it pop just a little more. Another thing you can do, like I said earlier, when there's something that is brighter in the photo, the color looks less saturated. And you can see that if I increase the luminance of red right here. See how it's kind of washed out now? It's because you're telling the program that the color is very bright. Corridor Digital actually did a video about how the original Star Wars movies did the lightsabers, and the middle of the lightsaber is actually white because it's blowing out the camera because it's so bright, and the glow around it is actually the color. And you can see why, because the brighter you make something, the less saturated it's going to be because the camera is just getting a lot of light data and it's not getting as much color data. It's not totally technically accurate, but that's the explanation works for our purposes. So you can also decrease the luminance a little bit. I don't think we need to. I think that looks good. Maybe just a tiny bit. I'll go -10. That looks good. Okay. Yeah, because if you go too dark, it looks saturated, but it doesn't have any oomph to it. So you don't want to decrease the luminance too much. I really like messing with the saturation more than the luminance values, but adjusting luminance does have its utility. But for here, I don't think we need to adjust the luminance very much. So let's just keep that there. I think a little brighter red works really well too. So let's see here. I don't think we need to adjust sharpening at all. It defaults at 40, which I'm not sure why. So let's turn it down to 0. Let's look at this R right here. It does definitely work on these smaller details. So I'm going to show you something. You can apply a mask really quickly, and you can have it only select those tiny little details, so you're not like over sharpening the entire photo. So what you're going to do, let's come down here to masking, hold Alt, and then adjust this slider, and whatever is white is what the sharpening amount slider is going to adjust. So you increase the mask until it only picks up those hard edges. So about right there. And it's usually above 90 or even 95 sometimes because you only want those sharp edges to be picked up. So now we're going to drag the sharpening up, and you're going to see that it picks up those edges really nicely, and it doesn't mess with any of these flatter surfaces without the hard edges. I believe what the masking does is it picks up on contrast, so whenever you have hard corners like that, the light reflects very differently on those corners. So you have a lot of contrast at sharp corners. And so that's why when you drag the masking slider up, it deselects all the stuff with lower contrast until you only have like super high contrast areas that it will adjust. So there's a little lesson in sharpening and sharpening masks. Lens corrections, 2470. Remove chromatic aberration, I already did. You can see some chromatic aberration right here. There's a bit of magenta coming off of that R. So I'm curious if I don't remove chromatic aberration, what it looks like. Oh, it's just more colors. If I do that. Oh, I see. Okay. It mostly just adjusts the aberration to one color, I guess, in this situation. Instead of it making like a rainbow. So yeah, that is definitely less distracting. It feels like there's just as much aberration, but it isn't as distracting because it's just one color. We can go back up here, so we look at this, and we see that it's a magenta. Let's try pulling down the magenta saturation slider. Hey, there you go. That doesn't seem to affect the rest of the photo. It is affecting something on these threads. Oh, yep. Go. I don't know if it's worth cranking it like that to get rid of that. And it turns the edges on this red right here green. So let's just do it a little bit. That's still there. Yeah, overall I don't think it's worth it. It's a little twinkle on the edge of the R. And I don't think it's worth making this green to just get rid of that little twinkle. So what I can do is mask out this area. Okay, I know you've got fancy new masks and you're excited about it, but I don't need that right now. So let's just mask that out, mask this edge out. Right now it's increasing the exposure, which I don't want. Ah, perfect. There we go. So now, decrease the saturation here. There we go. Now we still have that twinkle, but it's not colored. Oh, geez. That's a harsh blue. So let's reduce our feathers because we don't want to adjust that red at all. Oh, show overlay. There we go. Okay. Good. Very good. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. I don't think we have anything else to do. Here. I don't know why my camera keeps stuttering out like that. Sorry about that. It's back on now. Maybe it has something to do with the new firmware update. Did I update the firmware? No, I've used it after the firmware update. Okay, so now I'm sure you saw, after zooming in all over the place, all these specks of dust. Now, most people wouldn't bother with it, and other photographers, I know for a fact, do not bother with it, because there's one in particular I follow on Instagram who also does car photos, and they never take the time to edit out little things like that, and that is what will set you apart. Editing out, taking the time to really nail down your image and really get it just chef's kiss is what will set you apart. An update's available already? I just downloaded it yesterday. Yeah, I don't know what's up with my camera, but okay. Let's get started. What is that? J. Funny or handy little tool. If you hold down Alt and move your mouse side to side, it adjusts the size, and up and down affects the hardness or the feather. So I like a generous feather. Good feathering, sir. And we're going to go around. And sometimes it's not even dust. It's just a slightly darker area or a slightly brighter area. And doing this without using some just huge sweeping mask or filter will make it look very, very clean without making it look over processed, because you're only adjusting these small areas and it makes it look fantastic. So here, sometimes it can be difficult in like little cracks like this because it'll make the edges look funny. Right now, it worked fantastic, so I don't have to worry about it yet. But sometimes you'll have to use the clone stamp. Oh God, how do I turn that grid off? Grid. I just reinstalled Windows and reinstalled all my programs, so my settings. No. Oh, there's another grid option. I wonder if that's it. Okay, sorry. I need to remove. I need to remove this because I did it on my last install and the pixel grids just drive me crazy. View, show, pixel grid. Okay. Oh, I hate that. It's like if I'm close enough for the grid to kick on, I can see the individual pixels. I don't need a grid for it. Although, answer in the comments, if you do use the pixel grid, I would love to know what you use it for. So here's a good example of when the clone stamp tool comes in handy. So this kind of messed up the edge right here, you can see. So I'm using the clone stamp somewhere up here where I have plenty of room to carry on, and I'm going to fix the edge just like that. So go back to the healing tool, which is default shortcut J. If you just hit J, it'll take you right to it. There we go. Clean up that reflection a bit. Now, a lot of people probably think this is overkill. And it is a little bit. But like I said, this is the kind of thing that will really make you stand out. Go the extra 10 miles. And this does get tedious. It looks very tedious. In fact, there was a Q3, it's a compact SUV, that I took a picture of, and there are about, I don't know, probably 50 lights in the ceiling of the dealership, and I edited out every single one of them. And some of them were on edges or lines, and so they reflected weird, and that took a while. But it looked so much better afterwards. And the smaller you can make your healing tool, the better. Because it will be harder to tell, or almost impossible, that you used a healing tool. This is a clone stamp situation, I think. Let's increase the hardness a little bit. Select. Boom. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. You can see a lot of stuff back here. I don't know what that is. That looks like a big fingerprint. I'm going to just see what that does. Oh, wow. That actually... I wasn't expecting a heal tool to work very well on that size of a smudge, but that knocked it out of the park. Here's some more just either pieces of dust on the lens or something, or I don't know. I don't think they're on the lens. They're down there. They're just out of focus. And this texture is really easy to do healing tools because it's messy, and so it really disguises the artifacts of using your healing tools very well. There we go. That is a reflection in there, but it just looked a little hard right there, so I wanted to just get rid of that spot. And I know this is the minus sign for the drive, like go down a gear, but you can't really tell from the picture, and you're not sure what it is. So that's another thing. Sometimes you might want to edit out something that is actually supposed to be there, but in the photo you can't tell what it is, so it might be a little distracting. I don't think this is too distracting, but it is something I want to get rid of because I think it could be. Sometimes clicking healing multiple times will help because it continues to blend everything around it, so it kind of smooths out the adjustment. So you can see here. There we go. That looks good. Nailed it. Can't even tell. You don't have to get all of them, these little white specks, pieces of dust, but just the ones that kind of stand out the most, because you still want it to look natural, and you don't want it to look over-edited. So this looks more of just like a texture. I know it's dust, but it just kind of looks like texture, and you can't tell that it's dust from the picture. So I'm going to leave it in. And I think this picture's just about done. What's that? It's a tiny bit darker there. That you can tell it's supposed to be there, so I'm not going to worry about that. I know I have been doing this only on one layer. I just realized that. So, oh well. But this is something, adjustments like this. I do like doing on my base layer, but some people may not like that. And I understand why, but it's just the workflow I've developed. Maybe it's wrong. But it's just how I be. Now that looks clean. I like it. Okay. Let's go ahead and save that. Gonna export it. Actually, I'm gonna do that after I end the stream. But there you go. That is how I edit a interior photo of a car. I think I'll do one more today, but I'm going to end this stream just because it's already like 40 minutes. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. And if you'd like me to do a different picture or one of your photos, I'd be more than happy to. I think that'd be kind of fun. So just leave me a comment down below and if you want me to edit one of your photos, and I'll get in touch with you and we can work something out. Um, but yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for watching, um, and I will see you next time. Peace. Oh, be sure to do something kind for someone today, and now I will see you next time. Peace.